Go back to September 20th of 2001. President George W. Bush addressed Congress and said the following: Americans are asking, why do they hate us? They hate what they see in this chamber, a democratically elected government. Their leaders are self-appointed. They hate our freedoms, our freedom of religion, our freedom of speech, our freedom to vote and assemble and disagree with each other. Here are Osama bin Laden's actual words, published in a book titled Al-Qaeda in its own words, published by Harvard University. The section is titled Tactical Recommendations. Bin Laden says, "Then the fighters realized that the gang in the White House could not see things clearly, and that their leader, that idiot they obey, was claiming that we envied their lifestyle, when the truth which this pharaoh would like to hide is that we are attacking them because of their injustice toward the Muslim world and especially Palestine and Iraq, as well as their occupation of the land of the two sanctuaries. When the fighters saw this, they decided to come out of the shadows and take the fight into their territory, into their homes." And herein lies the importance of libertarianism. We are going to be in a continuous back and forth of fake divides. Black versus white, man versus woman, rich versus poor, Muslim versus non-Muslim, Russia versus America, China versus America. The only justifiable divide in society that we should tolerate are those who achieve their ends by initiating fraud and violence against peaceful people, and those who achieve their ends through peaceful trade and voluntary cooperation. Even the invasion of Afghanistan after September 11, 2001 was not necessary, but because the state is the health of war, the politicians who got us in there knew they weren't going to have to pay the price. In fact, it would actually win them a lot of friends along with defense contractors, and none of them were afraid that they might go to jail if they kill any civilians or wage an unjust war. That is another example of how the state is the health of war. The Guardian, October 14, 2001. Bush rejects Taliban offer to hand bin Laden over. The president said the bombing would not stop unless the ruling Taliban turn bin Laden over, turn his cohorts over, turn any hostages they hold over. He added, "No need to discuss innocence or guilt. We know he's guilty." Haji Abdul Kabir, the third most powerful figure in the ruling Taliban regime, told reporters that the Taliban would require evidence that bin Laden was behind the September 11th terrorist attacks in the U.S., but added, "We would be ready to hand him over to a third country." If the Taliban is given evidence that Osama bin Laden is involved and the bombing campaign stopped, we would be ready to hand him over to a third country, Mr. Kabir added. Along with the invasion of Iraq, another example of how the state is the health of war, this invasion was based but primarily on lies. George W. Bush, in his 2003 State of the Union address, said, "The British government has learned that Saddam Hussein recently sought significant quantities of uranium from Africa." This was refuted in an article titled "What I Didn't Find in Africa" by Joe Wilson, who was the alleged source of this uranium purchase. He is the husband of Valerie Plame. Vice President Dick Cheney went on Meet the Press December 9, 2001, and was referring to Muhammad Atta, the infamous September 11th hijacker, saying, "It's been pretty well confirmed that he, Atta, did go to Prague, and he did meet with a senior official of the Iraqi intelligence service." Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld was interviewed by George Stephanopoulos on ABC News March of 2003, saying, "We know where they are, Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. They're in the area around Tikrit and Baghdad, and east, west, south, and north somewhat." When it comes to the invasion of Syria, here is another lie that the war on terror has something to do with fighting against al-Qaeda. It actually involves allying with al-Qaeda in a number of instances. Here is Jake Sullivan, the current National Security Advisor for President Joe Biden, in an email sent to Hillary Clinton on February 12th, 2012. Sullivan says, "See last item, AQ is on our side in Syria. Otherwise, things have basically turned out as expected." This is high-level officials knowing for a fact that the U.S. is on the side of al-Qaeda in Syria for the sake of taking down the Bashar al-Assad regime, which Obama publicly came out and said Assad can no longer be the prime minister of Syria. He's an illegitimate ruler. When it comes to Libya, two headlines from the New York Times will do. First one, from 2011, says, U.S. tactics in Libya may be a model for other efforts. A couple years later, 2015, New York Times says, ISIS's grip on Libyan city gives it a fallback option. So the foreign policy to take out a terrible dictator, Muammar Gaddafi, ended with the Islamic State controlling large portions of Libya. This is the organization they were allying with in Syria. These wars are to the point where they are so unjustifiable. Major neoconservative Max Boot published an article in Foreign Affairs to his credit titled, What Neocons Got Wrong and How the Iraq War Taught Me About the Limits of American Power. Boot says, March 10th, 2023. Regime change obviously did not work out as intended. The occupations of Afghanistan and Iraq were in fact fiascos that exacted a high price in both blood and treasure for both the United States and, even more, of course, the countries it invaded.